He's about to.
Okay, I put people on mute just to cut down on background noise. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. Again, if people can mute. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you as always to Miriam. Miriam more than came up with the idea for this class. Miriam more than does flyers. Miriam stays on top of me to make sure we actually do it month to month, which is a tremendous endeavor. So I appreciate it very much. Thank you to all the people who submitted questions. There were many wonderful questions this time. I think Brachos was Miriam's idea also, by the way, I think so. So we'll, as we've done in the past, God willing, I'll go through all the questions first. Please hold follow-up questions. And then, God willing, there'll be plenty of time at the end for people to ask various follow-up questions. Okay. Question number one. The questioner requests that we address the different types of after brachos which are needed. So just to briefly summarize, there are three types of after brachos on food. In other words, of course, when we eat food, we make a bracha first. And most of the time, we make an after bracha. We'll talk about soon some circumstances where we don't. Broadly speaking, there are three types of brachos achronos, brachos that we make following eating. Of course, when we eat bread, if we eat a kazayas of bread is something like the size of maybe like half a slice of rye bread or something. We bench the birkat hamazon. We say that afterwards. Now, there's another after bracha that we say on many foods. It's a very brief after bracha. It's called the Bahrain of Fascists. That, as a general rule, we say on things that are shahakol and ho'adama. It's a very brief after bracha. Now, of course, if we're benching, there's no need for us to say the Bahrain of Fascists. So you see for some, if you have a meal that involved bread, you say birkat hamazon, the benching. If you have something else that didn't involve bread, many times you say Bahrain of Fascists. Now, this is the trickiest one. There's an in-between bracha that's called me'ein shalosh. That's akin to three brachos. It's sort of considered a mini version of the birkat hamazon. And this trips up a lot of people as to when one would or wouldn't say it. The rule is as follows. We say that special after bracha on the 7 species for which Israel is praised. So that's anything mazonos, except, not counting rice, by the way. So something that's wheat-based, something that's barley-based, something that's rye-based, something that's oat-based, or spelt-based. Now, of course, if it was a bread that was made from one of those flours, you're going to bench. You're going to say the full birkat hamazon. But if it's pretzels made from wheat flour, then you'll make what's called al hamichya. But it's not only for those mazonos things. It's for any of the fruits that are of the 7 species. So that includes grapes, dates, olives, figs, and pomegranates. Okay, it's very confusing in the benchers because the benchers say this is an after bracha you make for fruit. So if I eat an apple is not one of the 7 species. So if I eat an apple, I make a Bahrain of Fascists, that very brief bracha we spoke about. But if I have grapes, then I make this special, this like page-long after bracha, which is known as al ha'itzi al pri. It's basically the same thing as the al hamichya, except if I have mazonos, there's one column, and if I have fruits from Israel, there's another column. And then there's one more thing I would say that for, which is if I have wine or grape juice. If I have wine or grape juice, that's also because grapes are from the species of Israel, and wine and grape juice are considered a step up for grapes. So in that circumstance, I also make this special after bracha. Now, I want to clarify an interesting halacha. If I have grapes and an apple, okay, so that's very interesting because an apple would normally warrant a Bahrain of Fascists because it's not from the 7 species of Israel, whereas grapes would warrant this special, like page-long after bracha. So if I have both of them in a meal, so the grapes carry the day. So I make the bracha achrona on grapes, and that covers the apple, because the grapes is like the super after bracha for fruit. Okay, so I hope that's making sense. I want to sum it up one more time. Benching is for bread. Bahrain of Fascists is for the vast majority of other things. And that like page-long thing in the bencher with different categories are specifically for the 7 species of Israel. Mizonos, not including rice, but the other mizonoses. And then the fruits would be grapes, figs, dates, olives, pomegranates, and a beverage would be wine or grape juice. I should also mention that in general, there are exceptions, but in general, if I'm at a meal and let's say it wasn't a meal that I watched, let's say it's Kiddush and Shul. Remember that Kiddush and Shul, there's such a concept. So when I'm in Shul for Kiddush, so I have a very good spot there in the front. So I get a lot of grape juice. I get more grape juice than the average Kiddush participant. So I drink enough grape juice to warrant an after bracha on the grape juice. So the halacha is that as long as I have in mind that I might drink another beverage, I don't make a shahakol on seltzer or Diet Coke that I drink at the Kiddush, because the hagafen is considered to be like the super beverage bracha. And similarly, if I have enough wine or grape juice to make the after bracha, I wouldn't make a Bahrain of Fascists on my cup of Diet Coke. Now, I just want to clarify, if I have carrots at the Kiddush, let me just say this scenario for a second. So at the Kiddush, I have to be careful. I have to see who's on the Zoom. I'm gonna give very healthy examples because I don't know who's really listening, and this is recorded. And my wife is frequently the one to upload it for me. So there I am at Kiddush. So I start off having a cup of grape juice, or a majority of a Kiddush cup of grape juice. Fine. Then I have mizonos. So I would only have things like pretzels or crackers. I wouldn't have cookies or anything. But I have, that's the mizonos that I have. And then I have carrots. And then I have a cup of Diet Coke. So what happens for my after bracha? So there were 2 different things that I had that warrant that page-long after bracha. There was the pretzels, that's the mizonos version. And there was the grape juice. So actually I make one after bracha and I insert both of those at the place, there's like 3 columns. So I say ala michav el chalkala, v'al hagefen v'al pri hagefen, and then I proceed. And at the end also, I that the baruch at the end is also the choices. I say both the mizonos choice and the grape juice choice. Now, there's no need for me to say Bahrain of Fascists for the Diet Coke because that falls under the grape juice, but I do need to say Bahrain of Fascists because I had carrots, because carrots doesn't fall under either category. Now, if you've been listening closely, you'll notice that I've been trying to throw in things about amount that I ate. So the general rule is, it's a very interesting distinction, as one of the questions pointed out. For the bracha that precedes my eating, no matter how small the amount, I make a bracha. So if I'm having, a small bite of a carrot, I make hadama on that. But for an after bracha, I only make it after bracha if I have a kazayas. A kazayas, I compared before to the size of, let's say, half a slice of rye bread. Okay. Now, for a beverage, generally speaking, there's discussion in some, but most of the time I only make an after bracha if I have a revius. A revius, let's determine a revius as being, certainly if I've had 3 fluid ounces, that's definitely revius. Okay. Like a simple plastic cup that we use for drinking, it's probably normally 6 fluid ounces, just to give you a sense. 3 fluid ounces isn't that much. So the question is, let's say I partake of something and I have less than one of those amounts. I have less than a kazayas of carrots. I have less than a revius of a beverage. So the basic halacha is, if I have less than the requisite amount, there's no after bracha. I walk away. But I want to clarify a few exceptions to that. One is, it's worthwhile noting that foods combine for this. So if I had just a little bit of a carrot and a little bit of an apple, and I had some jelly beans, and none of those things alone were a kazayas, but they added up to a kazayas, I would make a bar nefashos. And in fact, I'll tell you one that's probably more interesting. Let's say I had a small amount of a cookie, not a full kazayas of a cookie, and I had a carrot, and not a kazayas of a carrot. But if I would add them together, I ate a kazayas of food. Even though normally the cookie gets an al hamichya, because the cookie's not going to warrant an al hamichya because I didn't eat enough of it, if the cookie and the carrot combine to a kazayas, I make a bor nefashos. I hope that made sense to everybody. One other thing I want to mention is there's a unique status in halacha if a person consumes the entirety of a natural item. So, for example, a grape. Even though a grape is not a kazayas, the way we think of it, or maybe a better example is a raisin. A raisin is certainly not a kazayas. A raisin is very small, but being that it's like a full natural thing, this is a full entity, naturally so. Not that's how the person made it in the bakery, but naturally so. Then actually, there's a school of thought that it would warrant an after bracha. There's a whole difference of opinion about it. So actually, it's discouraged in halacha to eat less than a kazayas when I'm eating a full natural piece of something, a full natural entity. It's normally if I'm not going to eat a kazayas, I should eat a little bit less than the full natural thing, or I should try to eat a kazayas. But if the bottom line is if the person ate less than the requisite shear, like requisite measurement, they don't make an after bracha on that. Okay. Okay, so now this is a really important question. You have a food in front of you, and it's very hard to know what the appropriate bracha is. You're really stumped. You don't know if it's ha'adamo or mazonos. I don't want to bog us down with details, but there is actually some interesting scenarios that actually could happen. You don't know what bracha to make. So what are you supposed to do in that situation? The questioner points out, and it's a very good point, that if it's ha'adama, it'll be one after bracha of bar nefashos, and if it's mazonos, it'll be an ala michias. This is like high stakes in terms of what you should do. So there is a general idea that if I don't know what bracha to make, I'm always safe with shahakol. I'll mention that in my various years in Brachos bees when I was in elementary school, this is what I'm supposed to say as a future rabbi, that I won the bracha bee every year. I never won the bracha bee, never, ever. But I remember sitting there at times thinking to myself, why don't you just say shahakol every time? Let them prove you wrong. We know that, shahakol is a good catch-all. But the truth is, especially when it's such a stark difference like what the person is mentioning, really the best thing, thank God we have so many foods at our disposal today. First of all, there are wonderful apps out about what bracha something should be and stuff like that. But if a person, it's more of like a ingredient shiloh, you really don't know, probably the best thing is to just have another food present that you know what the bracha is. So I'm trying to figure out if I should make Adam or Mazonos on this. If it's possible, it's probably a little bit better either to have it in a meal that I'm washing on anyway, or to have a little bit of Mazonos and a little bit of Adama from some other food, and then I've covered my bases. If nothing else is possible, shahakol would make sense, but the person's right. That doesn't solve the problem for the after bracha. Really, shahakol is not such a good solution. Forgive me, I'm going to go out of order for a moment. I realized there was one thing I neglected to say when we were talking about after brachos on the 7 species. Raisins, of course, as we know, are dried grapes. So the same way I mentioned that grapes would get the special after bracha because it's from the 7 species, raisins would as well. I just want to mention that. Okay. The greatest proof that there's a Jewish gathering is not that we're talking about halacha, the greatest proof that this is a Jewish gathering is the following question. The questioner wants to know what bracha to make on sushi. It's not a Jewish event if there's not sushi. We all know that. So what would be the appropriate bracha on sushi? It's an interesting question. Obviously there are all kinds of sushi, but let's imagine for a moment that, of course, there's rice on the outside, and let's say there's some type of fish on the inside. Now, normally when there's a mixture of the type that I bite into it, and with one bite I'm exposed to different foods, normally we're encouraged in halacha to try to determine what the one bracha should be on the food item. That's normally the rule. When it's like they say when it's a cholent, that's like in one forkful, you get all kinds of, everything is there in a forkful. Then also you're supposed to determine what the appropriate bracha is. Whereas sometimes cholent, the pieces are bigger, and really, like, first you have a little bit of meat, then you have a little bit of potato. Then in that kind of situation, probably everything should get its own bracha. But something like sushi, taking a bite of sushi. So what's the right bracha? So I should mention that normally we say that if mazonos is a significant ingredient that's contributing taste, normally, even if we don't think of mazonos as the primary ingredient, or even the majority ingredient, normally mazonos carries the day, but that doesn't include rice. In other words, even though we make a mazonos on rice is a little bit of an imitation mazonos, the same way that rice doesn't get al michya. So rice is a little different. So when it's sushi, it's this mixture of rice and fish. A person has to really decide what they consider to be the primary bracha. I don't think there's an easy answer when it comes to sushi. Trying to be politically safe as a pulpit rabbi, I don't want to try to define which one I think is the main. So if in a person's mind there's clarity that, it's all about the fish or it's all about the rice, then really whichever one it's clear to them it's all about, they should make that bracha. If I was having sushi, I think it's kind of a tie, to be honest with you. And so I would recommend having a little bit of the rice, making mazonos on a little bit of the rice separately, and I don't know, picking out a little of the fish, or just making a shahakol on a cup of water, and then I've covered both bases, and then I can proceed and eat the sushi without making a bracha at all, because I've made both relevant brachos already anyway. Okay, let's go on. Okay, the scenario is as follows. A person eats okay, it's a little bit of a confusing scenario. I'm just going to change it slightly. This actually fits into what we mentioned before. I'm at that Kiddush. I went back to Kiddush, and I ate half a cookie. I don't think half a cookie is a kazais. I ate half a cookie, and I had some carrots. So we said I didn't have a kazais of the cookie, but the cookie and the carrots adds up to a kazais. So we said in that case, I'm supposed to make a Bahrain of Fascists. What happens if after I make the Bahrain of Fascists, I go back to the cookie table and I have another half a cookie? Now what? So it's interesting. So let's say that the 2 half cookies add up to a full kazayas, just for the sake of the example. So I really already kind of closed the book on my first half cookie by making that Bahrain of Fascists. But now I had a second half cookie, and if I add together the first half cookie and the second half cookie, I had a full kazayas. Do I make an ala michya now? So I think you would not make an ala michya. In other words, once you make the bracha on the first thing, you really close the book. It was an interesting question. Okay, a very, very beautiful question. Let's say a person eats a full meal and there's not bread at the meal. Now we know the halacha is we bench for bread. If you have a steak dinner with steak and potatoes and vegetables, very filling dinner, we know you don't bench for that. You don't say the full birkas hamazon for that. That's benching birkas hamazons for bread. So a person wants to know, are they allowed to say the benching skipping the Baruch Ato Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam? Baruch Ato Hashem. Think of they'll skip the name of God every time in benching. Are they allowed to do that? They're not going to say the name of God in vain. They'll be careful not to do that. So I don't think there's a halachic problem with that. I don't think a person's obligated to do that. I think a person should make sure they're not going to say God's name in vain by accident. But if they're confident they won't, and it's meaningful for them to say it, I don't think there's a problem. But certainly not an obligation. And I would say, to be honest, it's really not benching. If a person wants to, if a person finds it meaningful, they can do it. But honestly, what might be, to me, in my mind, what might be sort of as meaningful and sort of, I mean, it's almost distracting to try to figure out where it is the name of Hashem, where's not the name of Hashem. I think, there are beautiful chapters of Tehillim that talk about God taking care of our needs. Maybe if a person finds a parak of Tehillim that's particularly resonant for them, and after they make whatever is the appropriate after bracha for it, they should say that parak of Tehillim, as a way of thanking God. But again, if a person wanted to say the benching without ever saying God's name, I don't see a problem with it. Okay, totally new territory. The questioner requests that we suggest a strategy to avoid saying unnecessary brachos when not all foods are on the table at the start of a meal or a snack. I think the classic scenario of this is Sunday lunch. Sunday lunch, there's all kinds of leftovers in the refrigerator from Shabbos. And especially since we ate so much over Shabbos, we're sure we're only going to eat a little bit for lunch. And we've, by the time we're done, we've had 6 types of foods. And then we have all these weird questions. I had a piece of gefilte fish. I made a shahakol on it. And 5 minutes later, I came to get the par of ice cream. And do I make a new shahakol? Do I not? How does that work? So I think in general, and this is really supported by various halachic sources to the best of my knowledge, in general, the assumption at a meal, when I make a bracha, especially if it's at my own home, when I make a bracha, the assumption is that any foods that I will could eat down the road in the next over this sitting that have the same bracha as what I've already made should be covered by the brachos that I've made. That's the default assumption. I frequently ask the question, let's say I said to myself, I'm only going to have 1 piece of potato kugel. That's it, only 1 piece. And then you've decided you're going to have a second piece. Do you have to make a new bracha because you didn't have the second piece in mind? I don't think so. I think we know that those promises to ourselves are pretty cheap. Now, where I do think this issue comes up is every now and then we like there's food that's not even around. You know what I mean? Like we were sitting and having lunch, and then someone walks in the door. There was something that wasn't even in the kitchen at all. They just came back from the store and they offer it to us. The argument makes more sense to make a new bracha on that food. But I would say that the normal default assumption when we're eating, and Mr. Brewer, if I remember correctly, talks about this, when we're eating in our home, is it's assumed that whatever brachas we're making should go on whatever other foods we eat at this meal. There's another question posed about time limits. Person is having scrambled eggs, and they make a shahakol on the scrambled eggs, and they get into a conversation, and it's 45 minutes later. Maybe they want to have more of the scrambled eggs. Maybe they want to have a drink. Does the shahakol they made on the scrambled eggs still cover them? How does that work? So I would say, to the best of my knowledge, it's the same rule of thumb we say for meals with benching, which is that as long as there's less than 72 minutes of open time, we normally say it's all considered continuous. But there's a very big exception to this, which is if I leave the location. So two examples. Example number 1, I'm sitting at my dining room table. I'm having lunch. The phone rings. My wife hangs up the phone. She comes rushing into the dining room and says, "Weren't you supposed to pick up the kids?" And so at that point, it's probably not ideal to say, I don't want to create bracha questions. I'll get them in another 10 minutes. So at that point, I put my food down and I dart out the door. Now, the real halacha is I'm actually supposed to make an after bracha before I leave. Even though I plan on eating more when I come back, if I'm really leaving the house, I'm supposed to make an after bracha before I leave. But let's say I was so distraught that I forgot my dear children that I forget to make an after bracha. So now I come back to the table after picking them up and trying to figure out why it's their fault. So do I have to make a new bracha now or not? So there, the halacha is that anything other than mizonos and hamotzi, and possibly the fruits of the 7 species, but basically mizonos and hamotzi, if I left the building and came back, I have to make a new bracha. I have to make, even if I'm eating the same stuff. If I moved around within the building, if I had in mind that I'd be moving around within the building, I don't have to make a new bracha. But if I didn't have in mind when I made the initial bracha that I'd be moving around within the building, then the fact that I moved around within the building also necessitates my making a new bracha, unless it's hamotzi and mizonos. But if I'm sitting at the table the whole time, and the only issue is just the dead time from the last time I ate until the new time I'm eating, then we really say if it's less than 72 minutes, I'm really okay. Okay, thank you for that. That's a very important question. Okay, really great question. What if a person wants to eat and bench while they're driving? Okay, a person is running late for an appointment. It's been a crazy day. They grab their sandwich. They're eating it on the run, and are they allowed to? They're certainly eating while they're driving. Are they allowed to bench while they're driving? Obviously, it's not only a question about benching. Are they allowed to make a Bahrain of Fascists if they had a soda? Are they allowed to make a Bahrain of Fascists while they're driving? So on and so forth. So I would answer it on 2 or 3 levels. So if it's feasible to pull over and make the bracha, the benching of the Bahrain of Fascists, it's highly, highly preferable to do it that way. By the way, I'm talking about as the driver. As a passenger, there's certainly no problem with benching while someone else is driving. That's certainly fine. But if someone is driving, if it's at all possible, to bench once they park the car or to pull over and bench, that is definitely ideal. If it's not feasible, if a person really is on the run, they are allowed to bench while they're driving. They are allowed to make a bracha while they're driving. I will say that it's brought down that it's extremely discouraged. That's like if they were eating while they're driving, and now they're sort of continuing that same mode of benching while they're driving. But like if they were eating while the car was parked because they need to focus on their food. Now they're finished. Okay, now that I'm driving, I'll start benching while I'm driving. That's really extremely strongly discouraged in halacha. But if the whole thing is in transit and they're really under the gun, it is okay to do it while they're driving. There's a very clear halachic rationale for it, because if the person's so under the gun, we're actually worried that they're going to bench worse if we tell them that they're not allowed to continue driving until they finish benching. They're going to be so agitated. This way, if you allow them to bench while they're driving, hopefully they'll bench in a menschlich way. Okay. Does a person have to sit for ala michya? So really, the halacha is I must confess to not always be diligent about this myself. Really, the halacha is a person who's supposed to sit for that page long after bracha. When a person makes that, they're really supposed to sit for it. That really, really is the halacha. Bahrain of Fascists, one is not required to sit, but ala michya, a person's really supposed to sit for that. That really is the halacha. Question is asked, when does one say shir amalos before benching? The general rule of thumb is if it's a day that one wouldn't say tachanun, it makes sense to say shir amalos. So certainly on Shabbos we say shir amalos, certainly on Yom Tov we say shir amalos. On Rosh Chodesh, it makes sense to say shir amalos. A Malav Malka, a Saturday night repast, it makes sense to say shir amalos. Chol Hamoed meals, it makes sense to say shir amalos. though theoretically you could do a more extensive list. I think it's very common to share malos at Sheva Brachos, benching bris meals. It's common to say shira malos. I'm sure that's not a complete list, but the general rule of thumb is scenarios that you wouldn't say tacharun if it was a regular davening. Okay.
So Malava Malka.
You know what? We'll hold questions till the end if you don't mind. Thank you very much. Okay. We're actually almost finished with the pre-submitted questions. Okay, this is a really good and important question. What's the story with brachos on medicines? What's the story with brachos on medicines? What's the story with food that one is taking, food or drinks that one is taking with the medicine, and the only reason taking is because of the medicine? What's the story with that? So here's the deal with brachos on foods. Brachos on foods are made for one of two reasons. Brachos on foods are made because one enjoyed the taste, or brachos on food are made because one was satiated in some way, feels the satiation in some way. And I would extend that when drinking a beverage, that they had a thirst, and now their thirst has been parched, if that was the right word, from the drink. So if there's a positive taste, one makes a bracha. If one get filled up from food, one makes a bracha, even if it wouldn't have a taste. And if one was thirsty and one's thirst is mollified, satisfied, then one would make a bracha on that. Now, many, many times, medicines don't accomplish any of the above. Something that is good for my body and good for my health, but doesn't fill me up and doesn't have a positive taste, we wouldn't make a food bracha on. Maybe we should thank Hashem for giving us such a remarkable medication, but we wouldn't make a food bracha on it. I want to give a few examples to see how this all plays out. First and foremost, I don't think this is the story today. Maybe it is. When I was a kid, ear infections were the in thing, because the medicine for an ear infection was delicious. It was so sweet and tasty, and I was very happy. I was very happy. I mean, first of all, sometimes we might have been able to get out of school. I was there, all the milas, So if it tasted, even though it's just medicine, if I could go back in time, I should have made a shahakol on the ear infection medication because I thought it tasted great. That's one example. My strong assumption is the vast majority of medications we take either don't have a taste and certainly don't taste good. So normally a medication would not get a bracha. I repeat, even we could be very grateful to God for giving us the know-how to do the medication, but that's not a bracha on food. Now, what about things I'm taking along with the medication? So if I'm taking water to get the pill down, normally I wouldn't make a bracha on that because water doesn't have taste. Now, if it happens to be I just came in from a walk and I really need a cup of water, then there's an additional benefit in having the water. And since there's that additional benefit in having the water, I'm parching my thirst, I would make a bracha on the water. Now, let's say I'm not taking the pill with water. Let's say I'm taking the pill with orange juice. It doesn't matter that I'm taking for the sake of a pill. The bottom line is I'm benefiting from the taste of the orange juice. So I would make a shahakol on that. It's the next logical step, but I don't want to leave anything up for guesses. If I'm supposed to take food in conjunction with my medication, before, after, so if I'm supposed to take food, so as long as the food has a taste, a positive taste, I should be making a bracha on that. So I hope I answered the question. I think I did. I think I answered the question. Thank you for raising that. Okay. There's also a question. This is so confusing. Brachos on lightning, brachos on thunder. So there's something about I'm not supposed to make the bracha until I experience both of them. What's that all about? So first of all, just to make sure we're all on the same page, there are brachos specifically geared towards appreciating the wonders of this. The wonders of this remarkable world. And the rabbi says through all kinds of brachos, and one of them is for lightning. When we say the bracha on lightning is osem ma'asev reishis, we thank God for creating this world. The bracha on thunder is shekocho gvurasam olei olam, that his strength and might fill up the world. Thunder is so dramatic. So here's the story. If I hear thunder, I'm supposed to make the bracha after hearing thunder. It should be pretty immediate after hearing thunder. I can make a bracha on thunder without seeing lightning. Statement number one. Now, lightning is a little bit of a question because we know sometimes lightning is brought on by extreme heat. And lightning is not associated with rain and storms and the like. So the common practice in halacha as a safety valve is to wait to make the bracha on lightning until I've heard thunder. Because if I've heard thunder, I can be pretty confident that this lightning is of the variety that I should be making a bracha on. But if I haven't heard thunder and it's only that I see lightning, then maybe it's heat. Now, if it's the middle of October, it's unlikely that it's from heat. And if it's, the cold of winter, it's unlikely that it's heat. So technically speaking, I don't have to wait for thunder in that case. But that's the story with that. So the real halacha is that there's a reason why I wait for the other one. That's because the question about what the origin of the lightning, what the cause of lightning is. So for lightning, the normal practice is to wait for thunder before I make the bracha on lightning. But it's not the other way for thunder. Once I hear thunder, I can make a bracha on thunder. Okay, the next thing is a really good question as well. So sometimes there's lightning, thunder throughout the day. So how does that work? When is it over or when is it not over? What's the story? So the basic guideline in halacha is if the clouds have cleared. If the clouds have cleared, and then there's new lightning or thunder, then it's considered a new storm. But if it remains a cloudy day, if I made the bracha in the morning, and then there's another coming of the storm in the afternoon, but the clouds were around the whole time, then I wouldn't be making a new bracha. Okay. This is it's a little bit of a different tack, but I understand the question. It is bracha related. You have a line in the siddur in the morning of the saying, Reishis Chachma Yiras Hashem Seichel Tov L'Chol Osem Tilaso Meres Loat. Baruch Shem. When is a person supposed to say that? See, the neat thing about Moda'ani is Moda'ani, we don't mention God's name at all, which means we can say it even before we purify our hands in the morning. So the first thing we say is Moda'ani. But Reishis Chachma has God's name in it. It's not appropriate to say till I've washed my hands. And once I wash my hands, so if I have to go to the bathroom, I shouldn't be saying God's name until I go to the bathroom. And if I don't have to go to the bathroom, once I wash my hands, I should make a bracha b'al netilas yadayim. So I would say that Reishis Chachma, if I don't have to go to the bathroom, I would say Reishis Chachma can be said after one makes the bracha b'al netilas yadayim. If I do have to go to the bathroom, then I would say, wash hands, go to the bathroom, wash hands again, make bracha b'al netilas yadayim, make bracha v'asher yatzar, and then if one may say Reishis Chachma at that juncture after saying the asher yatzar. Okay, so that's the list. Thank you all for these wonderful, wonderful questions. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the chats and try to, That's a good point, Menashe. Thank you for the feedback, Leah. Much appreciated. Great question, Menashe. Thank you very much. Okay, so I mentioned that if I have grapes and an apple, I have a bunch of grapes, definitely a kazayas. I have grapes and an apple. So the page-long bracha on fruit covers my apple as well. We know that. Let's say I have pretzels and rice. So rice would normally get a Bahrain of Fascists, and pretzels gets an alamichya. Does alamichya and pretzels cover the rice? No. In other words, rice would still get a Bahrain of Fascists. That's an interesting question. Thank you for raising it. Yeah, that's a great question. A person started the wrong blessing, and then they realize it. There's a lot of complicated back and forths about when exactly it is in the blessing. It's very complicated. I honestly don't even remember all the intricacies of that offhand. That I think it's hard to implement. As a general rule of thumb, I would say if you realize it's the wrong blessing, I would say, Baruch Shem Kvod Machsel B'Olam V'Ed, because you accidentally used God's name in vain, and just start over and make the right bracha. That's what I would say. Thank you for raising that. Okay. Menashe wrote, the potato kugel is actually the source for the potato chip commercial. No one can eat just one. Thank you. Yeah, I agree with the Tisha B'Av comment, Menashe. Thank you. Thank you. I have having many friends tell me what the words I want to use for a thirst can be quenched, a thirst can be slaked. Thank you very much. It's good to have friends who have a better grasp of the English vocabulary than I do. Thank you very much. Yes, great question. What about there's a well-known, I'm sure it's more than one, foul tasting liquid that the person has to consume before certain medical procedures. So I wouldn't make a bracha on that. I wouldn't make a bracha on that because it's certainly not a positive taste. Unless the person was thirsty and their thirst was quenched or slaked, then theoretically they could make a bracha. But I think it unlikely. Yeah, they wouldn't. Okay. Someone submitted pizza. I suppose what they mean is, what bracha do you make on pizza? That's a good question. Different opinions about this. The most common opinion is if you're having a meal of the pizza, I don't want to get into all the details of it now, but if you're having a meal of pizza, which is normally defined as one slice and a side of fries or two slices, then you wash and you bench for it. Whereas if you're having pizza as a snack, you make mazonos on it. Having said that, there are definitely halachic arguments that even if you're having a small amount of pizza, you should treat it as a bread item. But I think the most common thing in our community today is to say that if it's an amount that's a meal, you would wash and make hamotzi and bench. And if you're having an amount that's more of a snack, you would make mazonos on it. Oh, interesting. So Tums, I think Tums is supposed to taste good. I think so, right? That's what they say, right? That's what the Tums people say. So if you feel that Tums tastes good, you would make a shackle on it. I agree with you. Yeah. Now, if you don't feel it tastes good and you're really just taking it for the, for the heartburn, whatever, then you wouldn't make a bracha on it. The bracha for an ice cream cone would be a mazonos. It lends to an interesting question regarding, you have ice cream and an ice cream cone. So how do the brachos work out? We mentioned before that mazonos normally doesn't take second fiddle to other foods. I think what probably makes the most sense is to make a mazonos, but to say that the ice cream cone is all about the cone and not the ice cream is obviously ridiculous. I think what probably makes the most sense is to make a mazonos, have a small bite of the cone itself, and then proceed to make a shahakol on the ice cream and eat it normally. Theoretically speaking, if the ice cream cone had no taste to it and it was just a means of holding the ice cream, you would just make a shahakol on the ice cream. But what kind of ice cream cone is that? That's a really interesting question. The question was posed about Kiddush Levana. May a person say Kiddush Levana after Marv, but before it says? So the issue is that the Levana has to be clearly seen. Theoretically, I think it could still be said before it says, but practically, like when we daven Mincha Marv, I'm sure we daven Marv right after Shkia, I'm not comfortable having people say Kiddush Levana when Marv is over. I don't think it's dark enough. You can see the moon, but it's supposed to be like an offset between the darkness and the moon. I hope I answered your question. Thank you for posing that. It's interesting. If a person wakes up in the same Modani and then they fall back asleep, if they really fall back asleep, it probably makes sense to say Modani again. I wouldn't say Modani after a nap, but if a person thought they were getting up in the morning, I could really go either way. But if a person thought they were getting up and they really ended up really sleeping longer, maybe it makes sense to say Modani, but maybe not. The more I'm thinking about it, if a person said Modani, they probably said it for the day. Probably. The bracha on granola bars. Different opinions. Ariel, I thought we were friends. I'm just kidding. Different opinions. I personally normally say dama on granola bars, but there are definitely opinions that one says mazonos on granola bars. As we touched on before, the more pressing question is the after bracha, because if it's ha'adama, it's one thing, and if it's mazonos, it's something totally different. A number of organizations and authorities actually encourage a strange thing, which is basically to eat less than a kazayas of the granola bar, of the oats of the granola bar. In those Nature Valley granola bars, they say that, they come in two bars in a pack. You know what I'm talking about, Ariel? So they say that if you eat a little bit less than one of the bars, you've had less than a kazayas of the oats. And if you do that, and then you wait something like 7 minutes until you eat the next one, then actually you've avoided having a kazayas of the oats, betok the achilas pras, and then it's just the oats added with the other things, so you can make a Brachos Fascists on that. Yeah, interesting, Ariel. Thank you for raising. I would say that a person should make shir malos when they have the malav malka, regular malav malka after Shabbos. I would say so. Yeah, thank you. Okay. I believe we've gotten through all of the chats. Any other questions that anyone would like to pose, you're welcome to call it out or chat it. Anyone else? Okay, well, if anyone's still thinking, I hope, God willing, I would like to have a pre-Hanukkah one. I think there are always Hanukkah questions that pop up. So I hope to have a Hanukkah session. I'm sure Miriam will keep me on task, and we'll come out with another wonderful flyer. But I'm hoping for it to be before Hanukkah, God willing. Menashe wrote the Hanukkah one is always very lighthearted. Very good. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. As always, thank you for all the wonderful questions.
Thank you.
Take care.
Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.